Order. I call Baggy Shankar to move the motion.
I beg to move that this House has considered parking regulation. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Mr Efford. I would like to start by thanking the Honourable Member for Newton Abbott for support in securing this important debate. Alongside this, I thank my honourable friends for Darlington, Sheffield Central and my good friend and neighbour in Derby North for their tireless work challenging the rip-off fines which private parking companies across the country are charging our constituents day in, day out. Irrespective of industry pressure, we will continue to fight on behalf of our constituents who face unfair parking fines. And also I'd like to thank the RAC and the AA for their ongoing work to advocate for drivers across the country. I'll keep my contributions today brief to allow other members to speak for their constituents. I know that MPs here from across the country and across party lines, because like in Derby, their constituents are fed up. They are fed up of wrestling with a faulty payment app or an out-of-order ticket machine, only to find that they will still be fined. They are fed up of having the hassle of appealing a parking fine which should never have been issued in the first place. And most of all, they are fed up of feeling scammed by private parking companies who are unfairly pocketing their hard-earned cash. In my Derby South constituency, the Copeland Street car park is a repeat offender, ripping constituents off, workers and visitors, with unfair fines. But don't just take my word for it. Listen to my constituents who fell foul of unclear signage whilst doing jury service at Derby Crown Court. He will now have to defend himself in court against fines in excess of £1,000. Or the member of Derby's community with hearing difficulty who uses the car park to attend essential hearing appointments and after receiving an unfair fine is understandably worried that this will happen again and again. As another resident, when they contacted me, said, I'll probably just
briefly, please refrain from mentioning anything that may be before the courts as a matter of sub judice. Thank you.
Another resident, when they contacted me and said, I'll probably just pay the fine without contesting it because the hassle of appealing would be too much. And the data shows us that they are sadly far from alone. Almost 1 in 2 motorists who appeal get their fines cancelled. But despite this, 80% of private parking fines are paid straight away. A lack of proper regulation has written these companies a blank cheque to collect unfair fines. According to insurance company Churchill's data, they are on course to make 15.4 million requests to the DVLA for vehicle records this year. This is a record average of over 43,000 private parking tickets issued every single day. 1 every 2 seconds. And shockingly, during the course of this debate, 2,700 fines. It is time to say enough is enough and introduce a legally binding code of practice to put an end to this extortionate fines. Earlier this year, I wonder why private parking companies introduced a voluntary code of practice after years of doing everything they could to block a legally binding code of practice being introduced. To nobody's surprise, the voluntary code goes nowhere near far enough to stand up for drivers and give them the protections they need. The cap on parking charge notices is still too high. The debt recovery fees are still allowed under the industry code. Put simply, they are setting their own rules and marking their own homework, or at best, their mates' homework. And that is just not good enough. Private parking companies need to act with fairness and common sense, and to achieve that, we need a robust code of practice put into law, which stands up for drivers and holds these companies to account. Voluntary guidelines are failing drivers. We need clear, enforceable rules that cover signage, grace period, appeals processes, the use of CCTV. We need to put an end to the threatening letters which use legal jargon to intimidate people into paying fines. We need caps on these fines, and ultimately we need accountability. I wholeheartedly welcome the Labour government's determination to drive up standards across the private parking sector by committing to publish a statutory code of practice. And today I urge the Minister, on behalf of every driver who has faced the nightmare of an unfair fine, to commit to introducing a code without any further delays. And most importantly, the emails that flood our inboxes every day show that drivers across the country are willing us to stand up for them. Now it's time for action.
Can I remind members that they must bob if they're intending to speak in this debate? There are a lot of people who want to speak, so if anyone's intending intervening, prepare it carefully, because if it's too long, I will cut you off. The question is that this House has considered parking regulation. I call Martin Wrigley.
Thank you, Mr. Efford. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I'd like to congratulate the honourable member, nearly promoted him, the honourable member for Derby South, in this collaborative effort, which I think is beautifully well attended. Many private parking companies aim to make their record-making profits from the demands they issue via penalty charge notices, not being satisfied by their advertised parking fees. There is no incentive for them to operate fairly or to make PCN rules straightforward or clear, and no incentive for them to run a genuine appeals process. This model has worked on intimidation and threats, knowing a fair proportion of people will be intimidated into paying. This rapidly escalates into debt collection threats and solicitors' letters. This cycle of threatening letters, often referred to as threatograms, tend to continue regardless of appeals or evidenced facts. The companies will point to their own independent appeals process. However, these are neither independent nor fair. They are in fact run by the trade associations, British Parking Association and Independent Parking Community, organisations directly funded and directed by the private parking companies, the biggest of whom are owned by US private equity groups. For too long, this industry has been allowed to set its own rules and mark its own homework, and always at the expense of the motorist, and the RAC and AA agree. There is a legitimate need for parking management to prevent abuse, but costs and tactics are out of proportion to any legitimate aims. Primary legislation already exists to create a truly independent regulator. We urge the Minister to progress the consultation on the existing draft Code of Conduct and set up the new regulator that is clearly necessary. These private parking companies are out of control, causing misery for far too many motorists. It has to stop.
Would the honourable member give way?
I will.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. In Horsham Town, in my constituency, we have a central car park outside Sainsbury's, operated by a third-party contractor, and the number of disputed tickets is out of control. Would he agree that the voluntary code of practice that was introduced last year, it seems to have made absolutely no difference? It can detect no fall in difficulties.
I thank my honourable friend and agree with him. I have spoken with a former employee of one of these private parking companies who was dismissed for whistleblowing. In my own constituency of Newton Abbot, I've had numerous complaints about the behaviour of some private parking companies and the tactics they use, which include breaching data protection rules by hiding data and failing to comply to subject access requests, creating a culture of charge first, think second, and refusing appeals as a default position, using equipment designed to be awkward or to fail, such as machines that won't take cash or card, and then denying appeals, arguing that drivers could have paid by app, double clocking people coming in and out of car parks more than once, even if they have paid for tickets. One victim of this practice appealed and won, as the company couldn't provide evidence of the charges made, but it then took 6 weeks for them to cancel the charges. Deliberately targeting people who don't respond to their threatening letters, often issued with wrong address or similar. and selecting them for court action, knowing that these were the most likely not to turn up at court and then obtain a default judgment at that court. Also knowing the costs of setting aside a county court judgment is greater than paying it off. And there is a constant use of trumped-up bailiff charges, many times the price of a normal parking fine. In my own constituency, Norma, an elderly driver, forgot to display her blue badge. She received a PCN for £100, which she paid but appealed. She was not offered the discount rate applicable under the company's own code until I intervened.
On that point, will the Honourable Member give way?
I shall.
I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for giving way and both of them for securing this debate. At least 4 unpaid carers attending weekly dementia matters meetings in Brecon have been fined. Does he agree that there's more that we can do to protect unpaid carers?
Absolutely. And this is something they should not be having to put up with. Coming back to Norma, she felt bullied into making the payment to avoid threats of escalation. Complaints go into a flawed process. Appeals are simply denied, and the supposedly independent appeal system acts little more than a tick box with no real opportunity to argue reasons, and is immediately followed by continued threats of enforcement, action and increased costs. And it goes further than this. Private parking companies seem to have the licence to go much further than any other form of organisation. Why can such companies set up ANPR, automatic number plate recognition, or CCTV, have cameras literally hidden on any old building, often really high, on high outside walls, film entire streets into houses opposite, running 24/7, 360-degree view and night vision, when councils or police would never be allowed such a thing? Why are private parking companies allowed to use this with no restrictions, especially when councils can't use them at all for off-street parking, since the Deregulation Act of 2015 banned camera use for parking contravention in council car parks? We urgently need an independent regulator. The public need information on how the camera systems are used and who is recording. We need to make sure the appeal system is working and faulty parking machines are rapidly fixed. We need a cap on the maximum penalty charge that could be issued for contraventions. We need a proportionate and responsible debt recovery process for operators to use for non-payments. And we need responsible behaviour and transparency from the companies operating in this area. Critically, a new regulator will provide a single code of practice so that all private parking operators follow the same rules, and a single independent appeals process. In 2010, the indiscriminate wheel clamping and towing on private land was described as a licence to print money due to the firm's rogue conduct. The practice was banned by the local Transport Minister, Liberal Democrat MP Norman Baker, who said, "The rules governing parking on private land should be proportionate and should not result in motorists being intimidated or forced to pay excessive fees." Rather than the private parking lobby and finance world learning their lesson, they have reverted to an industry based on outrageous practices, charges and threatograms. Let's end this situation. I ask the Minister today to take urgent action. Thank you.
Order. I'm going to have to impose a 3-minute limit straight away, I'm afraid, so I call Lola McAvoy.
Thank you, Mr Efford. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. The issue that we're addressing today is symptomatic of a country where people who've done everything right are being burdened and bullied by a system that is weighted against them. I want to use this debate to tell the stories of some of my constituents in Darlington and to outline why I'm urging the government to take action to regulate the private parking industry. The reason that people are so enraged by this issue is because it is a microcosm of people's broader experiences. What was once an ordinary day-to-day unremarkable occurrence has been allowed through the incompetence of the last government to become a truly unacceptable experience for ordinary people. While many simply pay the fine, for a lot of people in Darlington, an unexpected bill of £170 really affects their budget. I want to pay tribute to the people who've shared their stories. It's helped me greatly in the conversations with ministers, colleagues and the companies themselves. Each of the 140 people who've reached out to me since I was elected have been treated unfairly, and I'm confident that they are just the tip of the iceberg nationally. I'm convinced that we absolutely must regulate private parking companies and that action on this is long overdue. The car park that the majority of my constituents have complained to me about is situated right next to the Darlington Economic Campus that houses the Treasury. While I was visiting the car park in my constituency in my first week, a man using a wheelchair tried to use the machine to pay for his parking. It had taken him longer than 5 minutes to get to the machine, so he'd missed the window to pay without a fine. He was rightly shocked and angry about the unfairness of this rule. The fact that I witnessed him getting caught out in real time convinced me there and then that this was happening so frequently that something had to be done. 10 months later, the 5-minute rule has been stopped, but we need to go further to protect people. We need proper reporting, proper regulation, an independent ombudsman for appeals, and we need it quickly. So take the story of Hannah Robinson. Many people in this house will be familiar with it. She received a staggering £11,000 in parking fines from a single company across 67 tickets. In every case, she paid for her parking. Her only fault was that she didn't do it within the 5-minute window set by the operator. Often this wasn't even possible. Machines didn't work, phone lines were unresponsive, and the internet signal was too poor to pay online. The 5-minute rule rightly has now been banned following campaigning efforts by MPs such as my friends, the Derby South and the members for Derby South and Derby North, whom I've been proud to work on this issue alongside. But Hannah's and others like her should never have been charged in the first place, never dragged through legal proceedings and never forced to fight ruthless companies to prove they'd done nothing wrong. Another Darlington resident, Kim, had her life completely knocked off course for parking in the same car parking facility. Like Hannah, she paid for her parking but was unable to do so immediately because of technical issues. She was sent a £170 charge, but she never received the letters. Completely unaware of the issue, she received a county court judgment, her credit score collapsed, she and her partner were both working full-time, doing the right thing, and were blocked from getting a mortgage. The fact of the matter remains, we must take action on this urgently, as it is long overdue.
Thank the honourable members for Derby South and Newton Abbott for setting the scene so very, very well. This is an issue, Mr Chairman, there's not a week goes by in my constituency I don't have complaints about those who come in and tell me they've got parking tickets, and I wish to register my concerns. Mr Chairman, to start, parking regulations in Northern Ireland are managed mostly by the Department of Infrastructure, who would be the relevant agency to issue parking tickets, and all of them referrals that I have every week on behalf of constituents go to them and to the private companies as well. And I'm no stranger to this on occasion myself, I have to say. In the financial year 23-24, the Department of Infrastructure in Northern Ireland issued approximately £7.4 billion worth of penalty charge notices, commonly known as parking tickets. Perhaps highlights the scope of issues concerning public parking regulation in Northern Ireland. First of all, machines not working, and people are still getting their parking tickets. Second thing, the paying facilities are not working, and they still get their parking tickets. Parking in a disabled bay, whenever the disabled bay is not marked and correctly lines in the road or a signage, and still getting a parking ticket for something that was there in the past and isn't there now. Also, those who perhaps are maybe minutes, maybe seconds over their time limit, and disabled people coming back in wheelchairs, for example, is another one. And here's a cracker, and obviously that's to use a statement was used. One of my constituents complained to me one day. They went shopping in the shopping centre. I won't mention which shopping centre it is. And when they went in, there was no lines. But see when they come out, there's a line done right round the car. The paint was so fresh, Mr Chairman, there were spatters of yellow paint over the car. That's how fresh it was. And guess what happened? They got a parking ticket. I mean, you couldn't write that story. Now, we fought the case, and to be fair, the company, they withdrew their, as they should have, by the way. It should never have happened. I mean, what? Maybe not say that. It'd be unfair to say that. I don't want to use bad language. Anyway, in relation to where we are, these are the things within my constituency of Strangford under time pressures. I've heard of residents' permanent parking schemes that have been introduced in some areas across Northern Ireland. For example, in Belfast, again, they have a system where a £30 annual permit to designate bays. There are ways of doing it better. And my hope would always be that, and I know the minister's here and he's a good minister and he answers things and he always tries to be constructive in his answers. There are methods whereby we could move forward in a way, and just a bit of common sense and flexibility would also be helpful. So the minister's always keen to ensure that he has discussions with his counterpart in Northern Ireland. So can he maybe tell us what's happening in relation to that? And while regulations may differ, as they do sometimes with their chairman in relation to, I asked the Minister in his talks with his relevant Minister in Northern Ireland, he would tell us what's been done to work it better together. Thank you.
chairship, and I wish to particularly thank my honourable friend and neighbour for Derby South and my honourable friend for Darlington for the work that they have done on this. I know I'm not the only one here who've had people stop me in the street or message me to tell me about how angry and frustrated they were for having to fork out for penalty charges in circumstances they thought were wholly unfair. And I've been there myself as a mum of three, having to get them out of their car seats and pull out the pushchair and unload the bags and try and ensure that no one is running out in front of oncoming cars, all to the chorus of one or more child trying to get my attention, the usual juggle. But if you then find a working payment machine and then have to download an app, well, try doing that when you're the only thing standing between children and a soft play. So when I read about the case of Rosie Hudson being taken to court for nearly £2,000 of unpaid charges because she hadn't paid within 5 minutes, I was really keen to raise this issue in Parliament. And it certainly isn't just those caring for young children which has led to cases that have been raised with me. I've had people with mobility issues or cases where machines weren't working or someone who couldn't even find a parking space and was still charged. But unlike Rosie, not everyone feels able to stand and contest. Many are put off by the threats of legal action, worried about going to court. And 3.8 million private parking tickets were issued in just 3 months last year. 80% were uncontested. And when I convened a round table with MPs and car parking firms and consumer groups, I was asked what a fair time limit would be. But if you've paid for the time that you've parked, there is no loss to car parks and they shouldn't face penalty charges. So I'm glad that they've doubled the time people have to pay to 10 minutes. But the only way we're going to have a fair system is if we have a statutory code. We want to protect drivers from unfair practices, plain and simple, particularly as the number of parking tickets issued to motorists have nearly doubled since 2018.
Will the honourable member give way?
I will give way.
On that point, does the honourable member agree with me that the sheer volume of parking tickets could be having an impact on our high streets and our town centres in terms of people actually wanting to visit and park there without getting fined?
I completely agree with my honourable friend. And firms have handed out over 43,000 parking tickets to motorists every day. That's one every 2 seconds. And in line with what my honourable friend has said, I want to finish by acknowledging the private car parking, that the really important role that private car parking plays, especially in our city and town centres, because I want people to shop in our brilliant independent shops like those on Sadlergate. I want people to be able to go to our fantastic restaurants like Lorenta's and Bear and the Dining Room and the Book Cafe. I want them to visit Derby Theatre and our brand new 3,500 capacity performance venue, Valent Live. And we need to ensure that when people use private car parks, they don't feel ripped off.
Yes.
Mr. Effort, parking regulation is not about where we leave our cars. It is about how we shape our communities, support our local economies, and how we respond to the climate crisis. Parking regulation, when done well, should enhance our communities, not stifle them. Parking regulation should not be a revenue source, but a planning tool to balance environmental priorities, support active travel, and nurture vibrant neighbourhoods. It is not about declaring war on motorists. It is about our public spaces that belong to all of us. We Liberal Democrats propose a national framework for fair parking standards, clear rules that ensure transparency in permit pricing, protections for small businesses and common sense exemptions for essential workers. My Bath constituency is a beautiful and bustling city, but it is also a city under pressure. Narrow Georgian streets and high visitor numbers means space for parking is in high demand. Parking regulations must be implemented fairly with safeguards for lower income households. And let us not forget the digital divide that we have already heard about. As we move towards app-based payment systems, we must ensure that no one, especially the elderly or vulnerable, or those who are struggling with their kids, are being left behind. We call for a requirement that all parking areas retain alternative, accessible methods of payment. Many of my Bath constituents, as we have already heard, this morning, especially around retail areas and tourist hotspots, have been hit with disproportionate fines from private operators. We need stronger regulations and a binding code of conduct to prevent abuse and ensure that all enforcement is appropriate and clearly communicated. Today we are calling for a review of private parking enforcement. Too many of my Bath constituents are caught out by unclear signage, unfair fines and appeals processes that are skewed against the individual. Very quickly.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Constituencies of mine in Yeovil have had unfair fines given to them at car parks run by Private Eye, XL Parking and Euro car parks due to unclear signs, faulty ticket machines, bad apps and poor road markings. Does my honourable friend agree it is clear that private parking companies cannot be trusted to regulate themselves?
Well, indeed, and I think we've already heard this today, we must have a mandatory code of conduct. I have one constituent who's hit with a £100 fine by a private company despite spending the entire time parked in the business who owns the car park. When she went to the independent tickets appeal service, as some people dare to do, the review stated the charge was in the region of £85, when the charge was actually a lot higher. It also raises questions about the quality of the appeals process. Mr. Efford, it is high time to bring private parking more fully under statutory regulations with a code of practice that puts fairness first.
Yeah. Put more money into working people's pockets. But almost as soon as that money goes into their pockets are being picked by the increasing cost of just living your daily life. And one of the most egregious culprits in all of this is the private parking industry. There are, on average, 41,000 new private parking fines issued each and every day. We're on course for over 14 million in this year alone. This is an issue that affects pretty much every motorist in the country, whether through having been fined themselves or being worried that they'll make a mistake and are at risk of being fined. I'll tell a couple of stories from my constituency just to illustrate the argument. Firstly, we've got Katie Lovett. She parked up at the private car park near the railway station, wasn't sure how the payment machine worked, so she approached someone on duty for help. This is what she said when she wrote to me, as her words are far more powerful than anything I could write. She says to me, I received a letter from a debt company in March of this year telling me I had a parking fine of £170 for parking longer than I'd paid for at the London Street car park in Southport. I've never parked there before, and I even asked someone on arrival how to pay. He said, you pay on exit by putting your registration number in and paying the amount showed. This is exactly what I did, although I found the whole process very complicated. After a lot of back and forth, she ended up paying the fine because she says, turns out it was my fault because unbeknown to me, you have to put the length of time you've been parked for in the machine when you pay. So I only paid for 1 hour by mistake and not 2. Katie's not alone because secondly, we've got an issue with the Ocean Plaza car park near the beach. One of my residents went to the shops there a couple of months ago, parks up, does his shopping, gets a letter 2 weeks later to say that he's been parked there for 3 days, 4 hours and 38 minutes. It was an obvious mistake, but it took the intervention of my office before the parking firm would admit it. I've even been caught out myself. I don't particularly class myself as a shrinking violet on this, or don't think I'm any less competent than the average person when it comes to dealing with these issues. But when someone like me gets £100 fine through the post, God help the average motorist just trying to navigate the complex multitude of different regimes and approaches. There needs to be standardised regulation in this area concerning issues like signage, grace periods, appeals processes, complaints handling, consideration periods so that people can make an informed judgment about whether or not to accept the terms and conditions. I will indeed.
Giving way. And does the honourable member agree with me that private parking firms are running a racket in this country by adding debt recovery fees on top of already expensive parking fines? And does he join me in urging the Minister to bring forward the new regulatory code as soon as possible and ensure it includes that ability to prevent conflating bailiffs charges on top of already expensive fines?
I agree completely. The £70 uplift that the debt recovery firms are charging is indefensible. For repeat offenders in this industry, There needs to be a statutory code of practice which should include the power to remove a company's access to the DVLA Register of Keepers, meaning that operators who fail to meet the standards of the code would be prevented from enforcing unpaid parking charges and therefore effectively unable to do business. Lastly, the government needs to stop the private operators issuing and enforcing fines due to inadequate signs, broken machines, faulty ANPR cameras and simple mistakes around dealing with the technology. I'd like to thank you again, Mr Efford, and I await the Minister's remarks with interest.
Tom Morrison. No? Edward Morello. Thank you.
In rural areas like West Dorset, public transport is limited, and unfortunately a car is not a luxury, it's a necessity. Our current approach to parking is outdated and increasingly unfair. At Dorchester South Station, a lack of parking provision has become a source of real frustration, with drivers forced to park in surrounding residential streets, sometimes blocking access to emergency vehicles or cutting off neighbours in their own driveway. Some beach car parks have been privatised, pushing up charges and limiting access. Where parking is available, payment systems increasingly discriminate against older people and those without smartphones. Apps require good signal or Wi-Fi, and large parts of West Dorset have neither. The use of apps and the withdrawal of cash or card options effectively excludes some of the most vulnerable people in our community, including older residents. West Dorset experiences a dramatic increase in population during the summer, up to 42% more people during peak months. That puts huge strain on beach car parks, residential streets and protected natural areas. There must be parking to account for these swells in population so that our roadside and verges, it's not our roadsides and verges which pay the price. It's why the Liberal Democrats are calling for the creation of an independent car parking regulator. A regulator would help ensure national standards for appeals, signage, access and fairness. It would provide much-needed oversight of a system that currently operates with too little accountability and far too much inconsistency. Hospital parking is another area where urgent reform is needed. Research by the Liberal Democrats found that NHS staff, patients and visitors paid out £1.15 billion in car parking fees since 2018. Of this, more than £300 million has come from NHS staff alone. The people caring for others under intense pressure are being charged to go to work. We believe this must change, and we're calling for a visiting and caring fund to reduce parking costs for NHS workers and ensure patients are not penalised for needing treatment or seeing loved ones. What we need is a parking system that works for those who live here, for those who visit West Dorset, and those who rely on a fair and safe access to work, healthcare and community life. Until that happens, we are letting down far too many people.
Nice and quick. Abassam Mohammed.
Chairmanship. I want to start by congratulating my honourable friends from Derby South and the honourable member for Newton Abbott for their excellent speeches. Mr. Chair, this is not a marginal issue, it's a systemic one, touching the lives of millions of motorists and contributing to the erosion of our high streets, public confidence and belief in a fair process. Constituents continue to be harassed, penalised and financially extorted by a private parking industry that has operated largely unchecked for over a decade. In my constituency, I still continue to receive complaints about one particular operator which has become notorious, and I'm extremely disappointed that they failed to respond to queries raised by my office. The scandal here is that there are many motorists who pay up, even when they shouldn't have been issued a fine at all. These companies are known to use intimidatory methods to press people into paying high fines. Why? Because people don't want to pay. People pay because they don't want the aggro. Chair, if I may, I had a number of constituent stories, but because of time, I'll just share one. Layla told me that she parked for a hairdressing appointment in the Broomhill XL car park. There is no coin machine, so you're wholly reliant on the app. On this occasion, the machine did not work. She kept trying for 17 minutes. Eventually, the payment went through. She didn't think anything of it, but before receiving a letter stating that she was liable to pay a fine of £100. She worried the payment hadn't gone through, but on checking her statement, it shows that the payment did go through. She therefore confidently appealed, thinking that this was an oversight on XL's part, but was aghast to learn that this had been rejected because, as per their policy, she was 7 minutes late. They erroneously state that there is an alternative payment source. There isn't. It's wholly reliant on the app, and this, at the time, was not working. As we've heard... We'll give way.
Thank you, friend, for giving way. Some car parking firms still believe that their code of conduct is enough, the code of conduct that they decide and that they police. Does my honourable friend agree that we need a statutory code of practice so that car parking is straightforward, convenient and fair.
I agree with my honourable friend. The private parking code of practice is not fit for purpose. When the Minister responds, I'd like him to explain whether the Government will consider reintroducing the official private parking code of practice as soon as possible, and also will the Minister consider the immediate suspension of DVLA data access for any operators found to have engaged in predatory practices or information misuse. Our constituents cannot continue to face this unjust system any longer. The only winners in this current system are the private parking companies who are profiteering at the expense of the public.
Thank you very much, Mr. Evans, for your chairship. I thank the member for Derby South and for Newton Abbot for securing this debate. Like many people here today, I have received complaints from constituents, but I'm mainly here because of Janice, who came to my surgery to tell me about her story. Her son tragically passed away from cancer in 2023. After his diagnosis, Janice and her husband went to seek support from a local cancer charity. They struggled to access the building, so pulled across briefly to call for directions. They then went on to get the support that they needed. It was only when they returned home that they received a £60 fine for allegedly parking on the side road. Understandably, Janice contested the fine, explaining the situation. The company who issued the fine state on their website they will reply to challenges within 28 days, but Janice heard nothing. She then received a letter to say that the fine had doubled. Janice's experience is sadly not unique. Another example is from Norwich train station, where taxi drivers were outraged when they kept getting fines for staying supposedly over the time limit. The CEO of the taxi company said, if taxi drivers are facing such issues, despite having tracking data to challenge the fines, what about regular commuters and visitors who lack the resources to do that? I'm pleased that in that case, the parking companies did review all of the fines, but it shouldn't have had to come to this. So the common denominator is a parking industry with free roam to do whatever they want, quite frankly. It's a lottery where you park, it's a lottery how you pay for your parking, and as many members have pointed out, that can exclude many people. So it's obvious that the voluntary code isn't fit for purpose. So I fully back the calls for a legally binding code of practice backed by law. So we have a system that is fair, with a cap on parking charges, with clear standards, complaints handling and professional standards, and a single independent appeals call. So I add my voice to the calls of my colleagues in this room across parties for immediate action.
John Whitby.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this afternoon. I'd like to thank the honourable members for Derby South and Newton Abbot for securing the debate. The RAC estimates that 14.5 million drivers will receive a parking fine this year. That's more than 1 in 3 of every driver in the country. In the Derbyshire Dales, I've heard time and time again from residents that private parking companies will sometimes employ tactics akin to bullying and intimidation, many of which have been eloquently outlined by honourable members so far in the debate, in order to get them to pay unjust fines. Mr Efford, this issue has clearly become widespread, with just 2% of drivers stating that private parking firms treat those who contravene parking rules fairly. I wish to share a few stories from the Derbyshire Dales that highlight the severity of the issue. Rachel Betton is a constituent of mine who was dropping off her grandchildren at a trampoline centre in Derby. I believe it's the same one that my honourable member may have mentioned earlier on. Rachel never even parked, but was charged £60 by XL parking services for entering the car park. Like many constituents, Rachel felt she didn't have the time or energy to appeal, so despite feeling the fine was unjust, decided to pay it. However, unbeknown to her, her payment never went through, leaving her to pay an increased fine of £170. Other constituents have had the same negative experience with the same company. For example, Kathleen Jackson, who was 76, told me that she was fined £170 after it took her only over 10 minutes to figure out how to use the machine. This machine has now been replaced due to serious functionality issues, but this has not stopped her from having to pay the fine. And furthermore, this issue is particularly problematic for disabled constituents who often need more time to get to parking meters and pay for parking. One such constituent, Claire Ashbrook, told me that these fines left her feeling particularly stressed, as she doesn't have the money to pay the fine, given that she's caring for her sick daughter. These stories demonstrate that the private parking companies cannot be allowed to mark their own homework. Although it's welcome that a voluntary code of conduct has now been introduced, it is voluntary. Mr Efford, only a statutory code of conduct will ensure that private parking companies are held to account, and for the good of my constituents, I ask the government to consider implementing such a code as soon as possible. Thank you.
Order, because you've all been so disciplined and somebody's not speaking who had emailed in to say I can be a little bit more flexible with the time, but not too much. So I could give you roughly about 4 minutes each from now on, and I am calling Martin Rhodes.
Thank you, Mr. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairing. It's clear from the debate so far that we face systemic weaknesses in how the private parking system is structured and regulated. And this is the core issue which I wish to address today. For example, one of the 2 DVLA-accredited trade associations is the International Parking Community. Members of the IPC are granted access to DVLA data to pursue unpaid parking charges. If a constituent receives a penalty charge notice from an IPC member, they are directed to appeal via the Independent Appeals Service, a body accepted by the DVLA for the purpose of handling appeals. While the IAS is an accredited alternative dispute resolution provider, it is not directly run by the government. The use of the word independent in it may lead consumers to believe that they are appealing to an impartial government-run body. But the IAS operates independently of both government oversight and directly parking operators. The International Parking Community and the Independent Appeals Service are both trading names of one company, United Trade and Industry Limited. This overlap raises legitimate concerns about perceived conflicts of interest, as the same corporate entity that profits from private parking companies through membership fees is responsible for overseeing the code of practice and adjudicating disputes under it. This lack of separation clearly could undermine trust in the fairness of the process. The IAS asserts that its independence is safeguarded by using qualified solicitors or barristers as self-employed adjudicators, all of whom remain anonymous, are duty-bound by the professional codes, and are paid fixed fees, regardless of appeal outcomes. It is also true that individuals retain the option of appealing a PCN through other means, such as in court under consumer protection legislation. However, for the average citizen, particularly those without time, resources, or legal understanding, the impression of full independence created by the Independent Appeals Service name could easily be misleading. As a minimum, the current framework could contribute to a perception of bias and could foster a lack of public confidence. These are precisely the kinds of issues that a government-private parking code of practice needs to address. I therefore look forward to the Minister setting out the progress that the government is making in addressing these issues, and I hope to hear about the progress to be made and how private parking is enforced, helping ensure that there is greater oversight, consistency and fairness in this matter.
Mr Efford, and I congratulate the honourable members for Newton Abbot and Derby South on securing this important debate, and for so many others for campaigning on this issue. I'm here today to speak on behalf of the people of Weston-super-Mare, Wirral and the villages. Our proud coastal community with stunning beaches, 3 glorious piers and a tourism and a hospitality sector that plays an essential role in our local economy. But parking is a growing problem, one that is echoed across communities up and down the country. Far too often, the cost and availability of parking acts as a barrier, deterring visitors, frustrating local businesses and making it harder for residents to enjoy the very places they call home. And this issue is hugely compounded, especially in recent years, by unscrupulous private parking companies. In Weston, we want people to come and enjoy our seafront and our high streets, both locals and tourists. We want them to visit our small businesses, our events and our attractions. But when a family finds that parking for a day at the beach can cost as much as their fish and chips, they think twice, they might not come at all, and the prospects that reinforced so often by these unscrupulous companies of unfair, unclear fines further exacerbate the issue. And we need to dramatically rethink our approach to parking regulation in coastal areas, and I probably think that goes a bit further than actually a code of practice for private regulators. I think it's a more wholesale issue about how we reinvigorate our town centres generally. We must see cheaper and more flexible parking options, particularly at peak seasons, when towns like Weston thrive on day visitors, That might include capped daily rates, off-peak discounts, or partnerships with local businesses to validate parking. And too often we've seen a computer says no attitude when initiatives like this have been suggested, and far often we've been told that we've outsourced this to private companies rather than innovating in-house. Governments can make local decision makers shift their thinking on this. Second, accessibility is key. We've heard a lot about people getting access, people with disabilities, older people, people like my mum with Parkinson's who have been stung by these parking charges simply because she can't access the app or she doesn't do things quickly enough. Often those most at risk of extortionate fines, these are often the people most at risk of extortionate fines, and they're so out of proportion with the perceived error. This isn't just about convenience, it's about fairness. Absolutely.
Just on that issue of using the... Oh, thank you, Mr. Efford. On that issue of using the app, in my constituency in Darlington, there's no signal in the actual car park, so people have to go outside to then download the app, to then log into the app, to then pay their parking, by which point they've often incurred a charge. Does the Honourable Member agree with me that we should be including multiple payment methods in every car park in our code?
Absolutely, and I think this goes to the heart of a lot of things that we've talked about in this place around the shift to a digital-first world. That, in many ways, is great, but it does exclude so many people, and we need to continue to have access for cash and other options for people that need it. Coastal towns face unique economic challenges. Hospitality and tourism are two of the few industries we rely on in Weston. If visitors are put off before they even step out of the car, or punished by opportunistic private parking companies, we all lose out. Local people, local shops, cafes and attractions alike. And let's be clear, better parking regulation isn't about a free-for-all parking. It's about sensible, locally driven policies that work for residents and visitors alike. It's about supporting coastal regeneration by making it easier, not harder, for people to spend their time and their money in our towns. So let's make it easier for people to get to our town centres and easier for our communities to thrive. Thank you.
Steve Young.
Thank you, Mr. Efford, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. As constituency MPs, we all have a massive volume of casework generated from constituents who have come to us with these concerns regarding parking charge notices, and my constituency of Mansfield is no different, and there's a real sense of anger amongst local people. Common complaints that I've come across include problems with parking payment apps, payment machines that are being out of order or not functioning properly, difficulty speaking to a real person to query a PCN, in particular in relation to PCNs issued wrongly because automated number plate recognition systems have malfunctioned, and it's possible at the same time to prove payment. I've also dealt with many cases where someone has purchased a ticket but has simply entered a digit incorrectly from their registration number into a tiny payment machine keypad, something that many constituents, and particularly those with either visual impairment or older constituents, have come to me about. One company in particular, who managed the St. Peter's retail car park in Mansfield, has been a source of hundreds of complaints to my office. I've since met with the company in Parliament, and I am pleased to say that they've agreed to make numerous improvements, including new payment machines, as well as refunding a large number of PCNs. However, I still have many reservations about the conduct of car parking companies in my constituency. From my observations, it appears that many companies are intent on generating as many PCNs as possible, as much income as possible, and putting up as many barriers as possible for people to appeal. For example, not having staffed telephone lines or insisting that appeals must be made in a very specific manner. And I note that charge income is increasing at a record rate. The number of vehicles on British roads is increasing only minimally. Clearly, something is going wrong, and I think we seriously need to consider why this is the case and look at the regulatory framework that these parking companies operate under. Many of these operators have told me that they are British Parking Association approved, they adhere to the Code of Conduct and Practice, but Mr Chairman, this is a voluntary code which was created by the car parking industry, as the British Parking Association is a membership organisation funded solely by the car parking companies themselves. It seems to me that these companies are acting as judge and jury in terms of regulation of their industry. And, Mr Chairman, I think that enough is enough. It is clear that my constituents in Mansfield demand that we in this House scrutinise these companies and decide if further action is needed. And I therefore urge the government to look into this matter and statutory regulation as a priority.
Joe Morris. No, you're not standing. Anna Dixon.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Mr Efford. And I would like to add my thanks to the Honourable Member for Derby South, the Member for Newton Abbot and other colleagues who've secured this really important debate, and indeed to all members who've made contributions illustrating just what a scandal this is across the whole country. I'd like to use my time, if I may, Chair, just to illustrate this rip-off that's going on for my constituents in Shipley, with a number of cases that are impacting both residents and shoppers within the Shipley constituency. I spoke to one of my constituents who lives at Victoria Mills, a beautiful residential development in the heart of Saltaire. He's been trying to register his vehicle with the company who operates the residents' car park Bay Sentry. They have him down as owning 2 cars and 2 spaces, neither of which have the correct registration details. So every time that he enters or exits his car park, which is sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, he's being issued with a fine. The website is extremely difficult and confusing to use, and although he's been contacting the company and they keep saying they will respond in 3 days, he's still had no response. Having clocked up several thousands of pounds owing in fines, he's decided to move out. He knows that other residents threatened with the same sort of penalty notices have paid up because they're just too scared, as we've heard so widely today. Another constituent who, again, was scared, knew that overstayed slightly at the supermarket car park, but saw that the signage was extremely poor and submitted evidence to that effect. Went down the route of appeal using Poplar parking on private land appeals. Again, pretending to look like sort of an independent appeals process. And as we know, these are not independent processes. They are paid for by the parking companies. She, again, has got into dispute with Poplar, who are not progressing her appeal. It's really undermining people's confidence in parking. The third case study of Susan is a happier story. She was shopping at the new Lidl store. She was there 30 minutes before opening time, using the browsing time before the store opened on a Sunday. She received a fine from Parking Eye. It turned out, again, she paid the fine, went to appeal, no joy with the company. It turned out that Parking Eye were not up to date with the store opening times, and they should never have fined her, as she wasn't there out of hours. Thanks to my intervention on her behalf, we got a small victory. The cameras were updated and she got her money back. But it shouldn't require the intervention of MPs on these private companies to stop this rip-off Britain. It seems like they have a blank cheque and are exploiting law-abiding residents of my constituency and around the country. So I add my call and hope the Minister will respond positively to that and my other colleagues, calling for independent, properly independent regulation and clarity for consumers and a legally binding code of practice. Thank you.
Right, I'll call the front benches. I want to finish the front benches at 2 minutes to 1, just to give the mover the opportunity to sum up. So I call Paul Collar.
Thank you, Mr Efford. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. Now, I thank my honourable friend, the member for Newton Abbot, and the honourable member for Derby South for securing this debate. I know from both my personal experience and that of my constituents, private parking can often feel like the Wild West. Extortionate fees, poor signage, outrageous fines, and an often opaque and unjust appeals process are too often the norm. As one can see from the attendance of this debate, it's a real issue across the country, although oddly not in many Conservative constituencies, it seems. In the words of the AA, private parking operators often act as shark-like businesses. I consequently welcome today's debate, the opportunity it affords to shine a light on this issue. Some of the stories we've heard have been appalling, and the time has come to stop wringing our hands and do something about it. That's why the Liberal Democrats are calling for the introduction of an independent parking regulator with appropriate power to regulate fees, enforcement and appeals. It is vital that national standards are introduced to protect motorists and ensure transparency across the system.
Would my honourable friend give way?
Of course I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Trust in these parking companies is so low that now more and more motorists are moving to on-street parking. Like in Hill Green, where nuisance parking outside high footfall businesses has caused much concern with local residents. Would he agree that more needs to be done to encourage holistic parking strategies to ensure motorists and residents get a fairer deal?
I completely agree. We need a parking system that works. We're not against parking, we're against the abuse of the parking system. Absolutely. It is beyond doubt the current status quo is allowing private companies to act with impunity, preying on the millions of motorists in this country who rely on private car parks to go about their everyday life. As we heard from the members from Newton Abbot, Darlington, Strangford, Derby North, Bath and West Dorset and many others, many of these companies use underhand tactics to increase the fines charged and county court judgments issued. It is simply not acceptable. As one member said, rip off Britain. It's simply not acceptable. As the member for Derbyshire Dales noted, the RAC have said that the private parking operators are on track this year to hand out a record 14.5 million fines, each costing the recipient up to £100 and potentially more if they dispute or delay payments. Many of these are not for genuine infringements, but simply devices used as tools with little to no scrutiny by the government to raise money, as we've heard from many members. And as the member for Derby North and South and Shipley particularly noted, some of our constituents are facing fines that soon escalate to many thousands of pounds. It is truly shocking. The government situation like this should simply not be allowed to happen. The government must urgently stamp down on this abuse of the parking ticket system. In addition to the establishment of a fully resourced and empowered regulator, a clear national code of practice must be reintroduced to promote transparency. So can I ask the Minister to confirm when the new code of practice will be reissued? We also need a robust independent appeals body, as the industry's own processes are clearly not working. As the members from Derby South, Sheffield Central and Glasgow North particularly said, many motorists simply do not bother to appeal, or as the process is so difficult and time-consuming. Of course I will.
Does the honourable member agree with... Thank you, Chair. Does the honourable member agree with me that on the appeals process, many constituents across the country are attending court to find that their court hearing has been cancelled by the company last minute, and that is a waste of time and a waste of the court's time?
Indeed, I do agree. Tactics are used by these companies simply to increase their profits and to increase our frustration and make people impotent in the face of their abuses. Even when individuals take the trouble to appeal, the process is opaque and impossible to navigate, as the member for Mansfield so eloquently noted. I've experienced this myself when one of my constituents got in touch about the incorrect parking penalty notice from Britannia Parking. It was well-nigh impossible to find the contact details of the company, whilst the links they provided to appeal did not work. Put simply, the Liberal Democrats stand for fairness and accountability in the private parking system. Whilst we welcome the government's promise to introduce a code of practice, the devil, as always, will be in the detail. We will scrutinise the new code when it materialises to ensure motorists are properly protected from rogue parking firms. We remain of the view the government should go further and introduce a regulator who would have appropriate powers to enforce the code of practice and put an end to the current abuse. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Offord, for a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I thank the members, the members for Newton Abbot and Derby South for securing this important debate. As we've heard from across the chamber, there are lots of examples of these rogue parking companies. And before I begin, I would just like to note this is my first opportunity to reply to a debate on behalf of His Majesty's loyal opposition. Not bad for a boy from Broxbourne, so please go easy on me. Luckily, both I and my constituents of Broxbourne have plenty of experience in dealing with parking problems, as do so many members from across this chamber, as we've been hearing this morning. There have been passionate contributions from members from all sides, including the should be the right honourable member, but the honourable member from Strangford, which it would not be a debate in this. It would not be a debate in this chamber without him in attendance. And I did note lots of comments down from honourable members from across this chamber, which I won't go through. And I would just simply say, look, I've heard nothing I've disagreed with on these cowboy parking companies this morning. I think everyone has agreed with everything everyone else has said, that action needs to be taken with the rogue parking companies. Now, parking is a crucial part of everyday life, but too often it is overlooked because it is not a glamorous political issue. When parking is too hard to find, too expensive or just too complicated, it can have a ripple effect on the local economy and quite simply the basic quality of life of all of our constituents. So there are a number of practical points I would like to make to the Minister, and I look forward to the Government taking a constructive step to make things easier and better as soon as possible. While Labour's manifesto failed to mention parking, their priorities clearly lie elsewhere. The Conservatives pledged to fully roll out the national parking platform, which would end the ludicrous situation of needing one app on your phone to park in one car park, another app to park in the car park down the road, and so on. A single payment system would make it easier, especially for older people. The Minister for Transport said in February that options are being explored with the parking industry to deliver the platform. Can I ask the Minister how these discussions are going and when we will see action on this? Can the Minister confirm if the funding for the pilot version of the national parking platform ceased on the 31st of March? While making parking easier for drivers, there is a balance to be struck by making it simpler for simpler regulations and protecting pedestrians and local residents. At the last election, we promised to give councils the power to ban pavement parking if they so wish, provided they engage with businesses and residents first to ensure they are not adversely affected. It is incredibly frustrating for pedestrians to find their path blocked by inconsiderate cars, and for those with disabilities or young children in prams, it can mean the choice between a dangerous detour or not continuing with their journey at all. My own sister has used a wheelchair to get around Hoddesdon and has been sadly forced into busy roads too many times. Inconsiderate parking, at its most serious, can be a matter of life and death. I'm sad to say that there has been a case in my constituency of Broxbourne where an ambulance was unable to reach a person experiencing a 999 medical emergency, with paramedics having to run down the road because cars were parked too closely on both sides of the road. In my previous role as the county councillor, I was able to respond immediately by putting in place practical double yellow lines and to ensure that this could never happen again, whilst ensuring there was still parking available. Yeah, I will.
I totally agree with him on the challenge of pavement parking, particularly around the school run. There was a consultation on this in 2020. I hope the Minister will be responding to this. Can I ask why the Conservative government didn't respond to that consultation and take action on some of these areas?
We did try and implement some of the recommendations from that consultation, but it was the courts and the private companies that took us to threaten legal action as to why we couldn't do it. So I hope this government is going to answer those questions and reply to that consultation, because as she rightly points out, around school pick-up and drop-off time, I mean, I wouldn't go near a primary or secondary school in my constituency because of, and it is often, quite sadly, parents taking their children to school that are parking dangerously, that affects other children going to the same school. So we must do something about that. But I firmly believe that it is councils and councillors who understand their local areas. They should have the power to tackle inconsiderate parking. And the Minister speaks about devolving more responsibility to local authorities. Will this include the power for local authorities, if they so wish, to ban pavement parking? Local people also need a say when it comes to parking from a planning perspective. In my constituency, a new development has been proposed with just 17 spare spaces for 80 flats. If only half of those within a flat contain 2 people, a couple, who both drive, spaces will run out very quickly indeed, forcing more cars to already full neighbouring roads. Yes, we'll give way.
Thank you, Mr Efford. Although the Shadow Minister raises some really important points here around school parking and around parking on pavement, could he recognise that this debate is focused on the operations of private car parking companies who are ripping off so many of our residents, and what we shouldn't be doing here is diluting that message, which is the focus of today's debate.
If the gentleman, I just politely say to the gentleman, if he waits, I do come on to that within my speech. There are a range of parking issues which all do affect that situation. This issue around planning and getting the right number of parking spaces in properly is already happening in my constituency in Marsh Close, where constituents have written to me to share their frustrations about struggling to find space to park close to their home. Why? Because not enough cars were catered for when the development was built. The government's new national planning policy expects that parking to be integral to the new designs of new housing schemes. This is vital and should be applied in every new development. Almost every development I see, you always need more parking, so the government must prioritise this. Constituents have also been in contact with me with stories of dreadful treatment and the handful of those rogue parking companies, as we've been hearing from across the chamber today. Outrageously, Parking Eye has sent threatening letters repeatedly to one of my constituents demanding money without even an explanation as to why they got the fine in the first place. Across the country, 14.5 million tickets will be issued to drivers this year. Too often, these parking firms are working deliberately to fleece motorists for as much as they can, with misleading and confusing signage, aggressive debt collection and unreasonable fees. This must stop. The government must get a grip on these cowboy operators, stop this war on motorists and deal with the other issues our constituents are always contacting us about parking.
Sorry, you called me out there. Alex Nice, sorry.
Thank you, Mr Efford, and it is a pleasure to serve with you in the chair. And I'd also like to thank honourable colleagues, the members for Derby South and for Newton Abbot for securing this important debate, for the Backbench Business Committee for granting it, and I think for the spirit and for the intent with which they both spoke. I think it's clear. I mean, I'm not one, I have to say, Mr Efford, for generally diary policing colleagues, and I would always say to constituents that the number of people in the room does not always reflect the amount of feeling on an issue, but I think it is clear that both honourable colleagues have tapped into something today, and that range of colleagues from around the country of different political persuasions have come today, I think shows, as I say, they've tapped into a real issue. And I have to say, I think what the Honourable Member for Darlington said stuck with me in terms of that I think what all colleagues have had, as I have had myself, is that contact from frustrated, angry, upset constituents, good people who go about their days doing the right thing, and find that they end up battling a system that not only is not seemingly responsive to their challenges, but actually set up to challenge and indeed to trip them up. And I think that strength of feeling that the honourable members for Derby South and Newton Abbot set out, but also the purposeful and solution-focused nature in which they led the debate as well, I think has set us in good stead. And I think from, again, the contributions that colleagues have made, the rap sheet, the frustrations as set out by their constituents, I think has been set out clearly, and I will respond to the points that they made shortly. And I hope their constituents can hear, as indeed constituents from around the country, can hear their voices in this debate. I think their voices have been very present. I've got a little bit more time than colleagues, so one thing I just wanted to start by setting out, Mr Efford, that colleagues perhaps wouldn't have had the same amount of time to do, is that there is an intrinsic importance and value in private parking. It's important for our motorists, but then, as some colleagues did allude to, it's also important for the resilience of towns and cities and communities across the country. People want and need and must be able to use their cars to do their shopping, attend medical appointments, to go to work, take their children to the activities they need to get to. And in many areas across the country, the Honourable Member for West Dorset made this point, in many areas, people are totally dependent on being able to use those cars and being able to rely on good quality car parks, consistent and available provision. and all our communities and our towns and our cities rely on having a mix of transport options, of which privately managed car parks are an essential element. And that is how important and fundamental, you know, sometimes if you individualise some of the challenges, you know, a number keyed wrongly here and overstayed by 2 minutes there, it might be seen to be a granular challenge. Actually, this is a hugely significant one for the vitality of our communities. And I would say, not least because I, like other colleagues, will have heard from those who represent the private parking industry, that I've heard what they've said, that 99% of the time this is a quality interaction. But I think we have to hear the stories in this debate that show that too often isn't the case, and too often for avoidable reasons seemingly as well. So I'm grateful for the honourable members for setting out their case. I'm also grateful for those colleagues who've highlighted that this is an issue on the rise, and we've heard about scale, and we know, as colleagues have said, that between 2012 and 2022 there was a near 500% increase in DVLA vehicle keeper data requests. So of course there's clearly something must be done, and as other colleagues have said, there's going to be a parking charge issued every 2 seconds during this debate. It must be a fair system that ensures that motorists can park without fear of an unfair charge. And I'm going to speak a little bit about what we intend to do as a government shortly, but I think colleagues have set out quite an important, Mr Efford, roadmap, if you'll excuse a totally unintended pun, of different ways in which there could be improvements made to the system. So firstly, on clarity of rules, the honourable members for Bath and for Southport raised this. Indeed, the honourable member for Southport actually raised a very important point about his self-assessment of his capacity to comply or otherwise with rules. I would believe, by instinct, want to follow the rules to their fullest. I definitely don't want to get fined, Mr Efford, but it can be difficult and it can be unclear, and it ought not to be. It ought to be something that anybody and everybody can comprehend so that they can follow those rules. Similarly, if you're going to have good rules, you've got to have good signage. And Honourable Member for Derby South, the Honourable Member for Shipley talked about that. Again, it is important that it is not seen as hurdles for people to clear that are invisible hurdles, things that you could have known if only you were 15 feet taller. There has to be a fairness in making sure people know how to follow the rules. The systems themselves have to work. My honourable friends, members for Derbyshire Dales and for Mansfield made this point. I think similarly in my own constituency in Kimberley, which is in a dip. So it's often very hard to use your app because you can't get connectivity. The systems have to be systems that people can access and can use. The honourable member for Weston-super-Mare talked about proportionate responses too, so that if people don't follow the rules, that the penalties are fair ones and relate to the transgression. And I think, again, the honourable gentleman made really important points about what parking can do in a tourism context. And again, we would all know, I know it would be the last thing that he would want. Similarly, it would be the last thing I would want someone who's coming from outside of Nottingham to enjoy perhaps our fabulous nighttime economy, to remember the one thing from that day was, but I got a parking ticket, didn't I? But those things do stick. So the system has to be, fair and transparent. It has knock-on impacts if not. Honourable colleagues from Norwich North and Glasgow North talked about an appeal system. This is fundamental. Again, people must be able to exercise their rights to having a fair hearing, but also people have to have confidence in it, because otherwise, if there isn't confidence, then people won't use that at all. That means that virtuous feedback loop of perhaps demonstrating to the operators where there might be challenges. If you're getting a lot of appeals, why are you getting a lot of appeals on a specific car park? Is there a signage issue? Is there a technology issue? That gets lost if there isn't confidence in the appeals system. Similarly, my honourable friend, the member for Sheffield Central, mentioned access to the DVLA database. Now, this is something that is available where there is reasonable cause, and it indeed underpins the system. But I would say to her and to colleagues who also express concerns, if that is misused, of course, there can be consequences for the operators who do so. And then the honourable gentleman, the member for Strangford, talked about Northern Ireland, which of course this is a devolved matter, but I would reiterate a commitment I've given to him on a number of issues previously that he very kindly mentioned, that I talk to my counterparts in the Northern Ireland Executive frequently on a variety of issues, and I'm always very keen that we learn from each other, that, again, we don't create unintended, there are very good reasons sometimes for doing things in very different ways, but that we don't create lots of a lack of clarity because we do wildly different things. It's always interesting to hear what they're doing, and I'm always very keen to borrow the best of what's going on across the UK. And he also mentioned and used an example locally that he has in his constituency, and indeed a number of colleagues did it throughout the debate, was the importance that political pressure had played sometimes in getting the right thing to happen. And I think particularly of the 5-minute cap issue raised by the member for Derby South, a £2,000 fine for one of her constituents. Similarly in Darlington, an extreme, a matter of public record, significant fine for one of her constituents. And again, colleagues will know, reading ahead to the end of where I'm going here, that pressure by the honourable members and others from across the House meant that that system was changed under the voluntary code of practice. And that is a good thing, but that isn't how a system ought to work. And I think similarly in my own community, we had a number of complaints about the same car park. So a member of my office staff went and had a look and saw that one of the cameras had been knocked. So they were getting duff data, and as a result, we were able to get that changed. Sometimes that may have to happen a little bit, but that isn't a system, I think, that's particularly working. It shouldn't rely on politicians intervening in individual cases to change policy. So we can do, and we will do much better. And I want to reiterate, I want to iterate and then reiterate, perhaps, to colleagues, our commitment as a government on this issue. I hope colleagues have seen my strength of feeling in this area, but to say very clearly, we are committed to take action to protect motorists and to drive up standards in the private parking industry. We have happily, actually, it's very helpful, bit of support from previous parliaments, Mr Efford, that perhaps you and I would remember, but nearly, I think you and I almost exclusively, other than the member for Strangford, will remember the Parking Code of Practice Act 2019, Greg Knight, as a private member's bill, a very good use of the private member's bill process, and that places a duty on the government to prepare a code of practice containing guidance about the operation and management of private parking facilities. And I want to give assurance to colleagues that that was an exercise that confuddled and was beyond 4 previous Prime Ministers to this one. I think about 5 Secretaries of State, though one of them twice, not to mention goodness knows how many ministers in that time. The process was too slow, it's been too chaotic, as the opposition spokesperson says. The government tried in 2022, then had to withdraw it again. We will deliver, and I want to give that very clear commitment from this dispatch box. I will shortly. We will, as a government, deliver. I'll give way.
I just wanted to ask the Minister what time frame the department's working to, because I'm not the only member in this room who has asked that question a few times, and to get confirmation from the Minister of the time frame would be helpful.
Yeah, I am grateful for that. I suspect in reply to the Honourable Lady, as in suspect in reply to a number of members in this room, either via written question or in correspondence, I have set out previously that is coming in due course. I will talk a little bit more about that because we're having an important debate today. I will say, though, Mr Efford, we want to get this right, and I am aware of the potted history and perhaps some of the challenging history in this space. So we want to get it right this time. And we're committed to delivering a code that recognises the importance to motorists and gets it right for them. The department meets regularly with the AA, with the RAC and other consumer groups who've done such important work in this area to make sure that the code we publish acts in the best interests and addresses the concerns. We, of course, as you'd expect, Mr Efford, talk to the accredited trade associations, the British Parking Association and the international parking community to make sure that we're not inadvertently making life harder for motorists along the way. And I want to say we will be publishing, I want to assure those present that we will be covering and engaging with the issues that have been raised with us as we work towards publishing the code. I'll give way.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Minister, for giving way. Just briefly, as we talked about the impact of parking practices on particular towns, I'm concerned about some of the towns in the Tyne Valley where a lot of local efforts being made to preserve the local environment, to preserve clean air, to try and drive car use down and promote the use of public transport. Northern Rail have just brought in paid parking at Stocksfield train station, which has dramatically impacted the local community and provided a lot of concerns about future on-street parking in residential areas. It would be really good just if we could make sure that government's considering those kind of moves from from train companies that will have an ultimately damaging effect on our local communities.
I'm grateful for the member for Hexham's intervention there. I think what that shows actually is that there needs to be, and this is at the heart of the work of this government, stronger local say about the full transport balance. Because actually the goals that he talks about, I think, are the goals of many of his constituents too, and they're the experts in making sure they have the right balance. And we want to make sure, whether it's with regards to bus services, whether it's with regard to planning, as the Shadow Minister raises, those are tools that are in the hands of local communities to lean in and to plan at a community level about the amenities and the assets that they need to ensure that they can deliver on what they're trying to do collectively.
Giving way. So can we have an assurance then that he will go back and look at the National Planning Policy Framework to ensure that when planning development comes forward and is planned through local plans, that there will be enough spaces in development? Because as I've said, I visit developments regularly within my constituency. Everyone needs more parking.
I'm slightly loath, Mr Efford, not least because I think you will smite me down to start my speech on the National Planning Policy Framework here, but I have heard the points that the Honourable Gentleman makes. We have, of course, consulted on the NPPF and we have published our changes as a result of that consultation. And on the point of the Code of Practice, the goal that we're in service of is we want to find that proper balance that ensure that parking charges and debt recovery fees are fair and proportionate, but also that they provide an effective deterrent against that small number of people who would deliberately not comply. It's our intention to publish a consultation shortly, and I do mean shortly in that regard. This will outline where we are and starting as a government and give everybody their chance to share their views. I will really hope that, and I have no doubt, but I would encourage colleagues from across the House to take part in that as well. I am available to meet with any and all, as always, to hear their views. But this is something that is coming. I can't say strongly enough. That is coming shortly.
I thank the Minister for giving way. I hear stories of places like Cornwall Council being so strapped for money, they are now considering subletting all of their parking spaces to independent private parking companies who will run it for nothing, just on the basis of the fines that they will take in from the tourists visiting Cornwall and the residents as well. Does the Minister agree with me that this is an urgent issue, and I'm not hearing urgency in his timescales? Because can I reiterate the request for a very specific timescale to have this code of conduct to be brought in, please?
I'm grateful for that intervention. I do appreciate that it is clearly as a feature of all the contributions colleagues have made, it is an urgent issue. I would ask him just to bear with me when I say shortly. And at the risk of getting into debates about what is short and what is urgent, all I can say is we want to get on with this at its best pace we can. We want the thing to work, we want the thing to deliver, we want it to hold up. Last time in 2022 it didn't survive kind of first contact with reality. So we will be publishing shortly, but trust that I ask for a little bit of trust that I'm getting on with this at the best possible pace that we can do. I think I will finish on that, Mr Efford. This has been a really valuable debate. I'm really grateful for the challenges that colleagues have set out. I have heard those clearly and they will form part of my considerations as a Minister. I hope that their constituents who've had their voices brought into the room feel that real representation, but those who sit there thinking, well, this happened to me too, and boy, am I frustrated about it, appreciate that change is coming. And I look forward very much, Mr Efford, to delivering on that change. Thank you.
To sum up a couple of minutes. It's not an invitation for a 7-minute speech.
Thank you very much again, Mr Efford. Can I just thank all honourable members from all sides of the House who have taken part in today's contributions. And as enlightening as everybody's contribution was, it's really, really unfortunate having to hear so many stories where residents across the country have had to be subject to such fines and such tactics and behaviours from these private car parking operators. That's what needs to stop. And that's why I'm also grateful for the Minister's response, recognising the issues and the challenges, commitment to take action and also to take a little bit of time to make sure we get this right, because it has to be sustainable once it's implemented. So I welcome the commitment to make sure that a consultation process is started shortly, because enough is enough. and we need to protect our residents from these rip-off fines that they're receiving. And like I said earlier on during the debate, during the length of this debate, around 3,000 fines more would have been issued.
The question is that the House has considered parking regulation. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order. Sitting is suspended until 1 o'clock.